Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video and a happy new year. I hope you'll have a wonderful 2020 ahead of you. I thought I would start off the new year with a mystery that's a little bit different. With the introduction of some new guidelines, YouTube are beginning to target true crime creators for specific types of videos. And you may have seen a community post I did a few weeks ago in which I mentioned expanding my content into different types of mysteries, different types of true crime. Don't worry, you'll still get all my usual true crime content for as long as YouTube allows me to keep posting. But I thought today we'd talk about something slightly different, dip our toes into the water as the saying goes. Today we're going to be discussing the Smiley Face murder theory. So the Smiley Face murder theory was put forward by two retired New York detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte. The theory looks into the potential of a serial killer or a number of serial killers who are responsible for more than 100 drownings of college-age males across the Midwest. In a lot of these cases, a smiley face is spray painted nearby. Gannon and Duarte argue that this is the mark of the killer, linking each of these cases among other things. Kevin Gannon was a sergeant in the Detective Bureau with the New York City Police Department for over 20 years. He worked a number of high-profile cases before eventually retiring in 2001. He was a two-time recipient of the Medal of Valor for heroism. Anthony Duarte worked in the US Department of Homeland Security, working in law enforcement for almost 21 years before retiring. This theory was born in 1997, when Kevin Gannon promised the parents of a victim of a drowning in Manhattan that he would catch the person responsible. He was sure that this was not an accident. He thought it was a homicide. He was obsessed with trying to find out what happened to this victim, and even after his retirement in 2001, he dedicates all his time to trying to find out what really happened. It was actually in 2003 that he noticed that there were 30 or 40 new cases across the country, in 25 cities in 11 states across the Midwest, which had similarities to his 1997 case. 19 of these deaths occurred in Minnesota and Wisconsin alone. The male victims of these very similar drownings were always white, popular, athletic, high-achieving university students, very preppy types, and they often fell victim to drowning after leaving parties or bars where they'd been drinking. Gannon drafts in his ex-colleague Anthony Duarte to help him investigate his suspicions further, and they dubbed their theory the Smiley Face theory, due to graffitied smiley faces found near the locations where they think the killer dumped the bodies in at least a dozen of these original cases. But the smiley faces weren't the only strange symbol found at some of these locations. There's also a word, Sinsaniwa, a Native American word meaning rattlesnake apparently. Like the smiley faces, this word is found at random locations. It first made an appearance when it was found near the location of one death, and then they discovered that another man had been found on a street named Sinsaniwa. So this word, along with the smiley faces, also becomes intertwined with this theory. The detectives theorise that each victim is knocked out with a date rape drug called GHB before being murdered. Their bodies are then later slipped into the local rivers. Most will be found in the water weeks or months later, miles away from where they were last seen, with any evidence washed away. On the back of this theory, Gannon has claimed that there's a well-structured, organised gang within cells in major cities across the United States who drug, abduct, hold the victims for a period of time before they murder them and place them in the water. As this suggests, they don't believe that this is a single man, a single killer responsible for every single drowning, but instead they theorise that it's a group, a gang, who coordinate and work together. There are multiple people involved in this conspiracy to murder, according to Gannon and Duarte. But in almost all of the cases, they're marked by the authorities as an accidental drowning, usually as a result of an overconsumption of alcohol. To date, only 2 of the victims on Gannon and Duarte's list have been ruled as homicides. The rest are still classed as accidental drownings. In this video, I'll be looking into a few of the cases that have been attributed to this so-called smiley face killer, or killers, before going over the reasons for and against this theory. But it's worth noting that at this point, this is nothing more than a theory. Both the FBI and the USA Center for Homicide Research have publicly said there is no evidence to support any links between the deaths or any evidence substantiating the theory that these deaths are the work of a serial killer or killers. They stand by the stance that the majority of these instances appear to be alcohol-related drownings. So this is just a theory. The case that started all of this was the case of a 21-year-old Fordham University student called Patrick McNeil, who disappeared in New York City in February 1997. Gannon, who was working with the New York City PD at the time, made a promise to Patrick's parents that one day he would find out who harmed their son and bring them to justice. Patrick was last seen by friends drinking in the Dapper Dog bar in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. He seemed pretty drunk that night. He was last seen in the bathroom throwing up before deciding that he was ready to leave. He told his friends that he was tired, that he had class early the next day, and that he was going to jump on the subway back to campus. But as you can probably guess, he never arrives back. He leaves the bar and is seen stumbling drunkenly down the road, vomiting in the street. He really wasn't in a good way. He walks south on 2nd Avenue from the bar on 92nd Street, but he doesn't seem to be alone. A car outside the bar, which was occupied by a man and a woman, begins following him. When he stops to throw up again, the car also stops. He was last seen turning left onto 90th Street, heading in the direction of the East River. The car was seen following him down this street as well. You could argue that the man and woman in this car were concerned about him, this young man walking alone in the street, vomiting often. Maybe they thought they'd keep an eye on him to make sure he was safe. But that argument falls flat because something did happen to Patrick, even though this car may have been trying to protect him. Witnesses did give a partial plate of this car, but the missing persons authorities would not pay for a lawman search, which is a search of all possible number to letter combinations, in order to possibly identify this car. Apparently, according to the authorities, it was too expensive. Although it could have led to answers about what happened to Patrick that night, this car was seen by multiple witnesses following him, and the police never really followed through on it. His friends and family spent the next 2 months putting up posters of Patrick's face and his details, searching the streets, to no avail. His body was found 50 days later on April 7th, 1997, recovered over 12 miles away from where he was last seen. He was found in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. A lot of people seem to talk about this case like 12 miles is a huge distance, but personally I think that seems to be a very short way for a body to travel in 50 days. The medical examiner classified the death as undetermined, and the NYPD's official consensus was that Patrick had drunkenly stumbled to the East River and drowned. But there do seem to be a lot of issues with this conclusion. The biggest of which was actually Patrick's blood alcohol level. The medical examiner found that he was recovered with a 0.16 blood alcohol concentration level. Seeing as human bodies naturally produce a small amount of alcohol post-mortem, and that Patrick would have been in the water about 50 days, this level would have naturally increased by approximately 0.04%, meaning that upon entering the water, it's likely that Patrick's blood alcohol level would have been about 0.12, consistent with about 6 drinks. And this is a 6 foot tall, 195 pound, muscular, athletic man. So while 6 drinks for me, for example, at 5'1" and 115-ish pounds, would probably cause me to be a solid level of drunk, although still not vomiting, stumbling kind of drunk, it's highly unlikely 6 drinks would cause a 6 foot muscular man to be the kind of drunk that Patrick seemed to be that night. Maybe Patrick was just a complete lightweight, or maybe something else caused him to be that drunk, caused him to throw up like that. There's also the question of the positioning of Patrick's body when he was found. He was recovered on his back in a supine position, something which is very unusual for drowning cases, who are always usually found floating face down in the water. Although he had travelled 12 miles down the river, so it's not crazy to think that the currents may have caused his body to flip. But it's worth noting that his positioning was inconsistent with most drowning cases. It's rare, but it's not impossible. There are also questions around the lividity of his body, which in very simple terms is the pooling and settling of the blood in a body after death. Lividity can tell a medical examiner a lot, as the blood starts pooling within about 30 minutes of a death. After 8 to 10 hours, the lividity becomes fixed, meaning that the blood can no longer be moved around the body. Patrick's autopsy report apparently mentioned nothing of lividity, but to a trained eye, the autopsy photos clearly show that any sign of lividity is absent in Patrick's back, where you would have expected it to see had the body been drowned as it was found. His body also showed evidence of a ligature mark around his neck and burning and charring from his head to his waist, and they all appeared to be ante-mortem injuries before death. The medical examiner put this down just to exposure to the elements. According to Gannon, the body was not consistent with having been in the water for 50 days. The head and the upper torso did not show the usual expanding of the skin that you would usually see in the bloating of a drowned body. It actually seemed that the skin had contracted or shrunk. Also, his feet didn't present any skin slippage, which you would expect for a body that had been submerged in water for so long. The skin just starts to slip around a bit, and Patrick's feet didn't have that. In fact, they're apparently as if he'd been in the water for no longer than 24 hours. For all of these reasons and more, Gannon refuses to believe that Patrick was drunk and ended up in the water of his own accord. He's convinced that somebody else was involved, that somebody possibly drugged Patrick, followed and abducted him, torturing him before murdering him and putting him back in the river at a different point, the area in which he was found. This area and much more of the river had been searched in the time that he was missing, and his body was obviously not found during that time that this river was searched, and all of a sudden, it just appears there. This happened 22, nearly 23 years ago, and to this day, Patrick's death is still classified as an accidental drowning. But regardless of any smiley face serial killer theory, it seems wrong that despite all this evidence of potential foul play, the police never really looked into it further. I believe there's a strong likelihood that Patrick may have been murdered, and after learning about this case, you can see why Gannon clung onto it so bad and is so desperate for it to be solved. I mean, it's from this case that the entire smiley face killer theory was born. But is there really anything to this theory? In October 2009, 24-year-old William Hurley called his fiancée Claire after he picked up from a sports game he was attending in Boston, Massachusetts. He'd left halfway through the game as he was tired and just wanted to go home. But when Claire arrived to pick him up, he was nowhere to be seen. She knew that William's phone had been low on battery when he called her, he said so, and it seems like the phone ran out before he could give her an exact location to pick him up. But she heard someone in the background on the phone call shout 99 Nashua Street, which was the location of the stadium's car park, and the obvious place for someone to be picked up around there, so Claire heads to this spot and he's not there. For the next 6 days, William makes no appearance, despite friends and family's desperate searches, and surveillance footage was pulled which showed him stumbling and struggling to maintain upright. On October 14th, his body was discovered in the Charles River, not far from the location he'd gone missing from. His smashed phone was found nearby, and he was found to have suffered injuries from blunt force trauma to the head, eye socket, and behind his left leg. A toxicology report showed that he had a very low blood alcohol level, which was inconsistent with how drunk he seemed to be in the footage. But GHB, the date rape drug, was found in his system. Now, GHB is a natural substance that is found in human bodies. We all have a sort of base level of it, but it can also be a drug. 10 micrograms per milliliter is the cutoff that distinguishes between natural and unnatural levels in the human body. William is found to have 18 micrograms in his system, almost double the natural cutoff amount. Despite this, his death is ultimately ruled an undetermined drowning, with the police stating that there was no evidence of foul play. They thought that he'd simply walked to the river's edge and had fallen into the water. It wasn't a long walk away. Which is a definite possibility if he has been drugged, but as far as I can find, the police never really made any effort to look into who drugged him, how he ended up drugged. 22-year-old Todd Geib disappeared in July 2005. His body found 21 days later in a private lake in Muskegon, Michigan. He'd been at a party at a nearby orchard, and the police theorised that he'd wandered into the lake drunk and drowned. But according to Todd's mother, as soon as she saw a photograph of her son's body, she knew that something was up. According to her, quote, "He was not in the condition to be in there 3 weeks," unquote. His remains were only moderately decomposed, and he was found floating vertically in the water, his head and right arm above the water, like he was stood up in it. There were no signs of any insects on his body, as you would expect after being in water for 21 days, and a lot of people believe that Todd had not been in this water for the full 3 weeks, as the police have said. Danielle Hallen actually did a full video on Todd's case, which I'll link down below if you want to go and watch that. Obviously, I'm just talking about the theory, the smiley face theory, so I'm not going into loads of detail about each case, but she's got like a half-an-hour long video on Todd's case alone. So if you want to go and watch that and learn a little bit more, then that will be down below. Only 22 of the theorised 45 original murders involved had smiley faces linked to them. Some smiley faces were near where the investigators believe the bodies entered the water, others are near where the bodies are found. And this isn't in every single case. But smiley face is probably one of the most common things to graffiti. You'll probably see them everywhere. If you go on the hunt, if you go out for a walk right now, you could probably find a smiley face graffitied somewhere on something in your area. If you gave me a can of spray paint and told me to draw something, it would probably be a smiley face. So personally, I'm not convinced that the smiley face is particularly a mark of anything in this case. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. If these cases are a victim of this so-called smiley face killer, you can never be entirely sure of where these bodies entered the water. Therefore, a lot of the time, we don't know if a lot of the victims were ever even close to where the graffiti is found. There's just always graffiti in the general area. For these reasons, I personally do not think that the smiley face is the most interesting or even the most telling aspect of these deaths. It's just the easiest thing with which to identify this theory. I mean, the smiley face killer theory is something you remember. That name, it sparks an interest in people, so they'll remember it. I don't really think the smiley face is all that relevant to this theory. For me, the interesting thing here is that young, fit, athletic, good-looking, college-aged men are being found dead in bodies of water all across the Midwest and the Northeast, all under very similar circumstances. You might roll your eyes and think that it's just stupid drunk people messing around near water. Of course they're going to end up dead. But I do question why in so many of these cases, the bodies don't quite add up with being in the water for long lengths of time, why they have so many similarities. And also why so many of these men seem to have GHB in their system. The final case we'll discuss, although there are many other possibilities, is one of the more recent cases, that of Dakota James. He was a 23-year-old attending Duquesne University as a graduate student, described by friends as smart and outgoing. He was an athlete, the swim team captain, and at the time of his death, he was very happy with his life. He was getting ready to start his new set of college classes, and he'd just gotten a raise and a bonus from work. He had plans with his family that weekend, having spoken to his mother very recently. So he was at the peak of his life. He was doing really well for himself. On 25th of January 2017, Dakota and friends go for a night out on Liberty Avenue in downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He spends the night with his friends before deciding to leave, and he leaves alone, heading for his home on the north side. He's captured on CCTV as he does so. Some reports say that the bar had kicked him out for being too intoxicated. The last known picture of him alive actually comes from a surveillance camera in the cultural district of Pittsburgh as he walks through Katz Plaza and down an alleyway. He's looking down at his phone as he walks. Apparently he's been kicked out of this bar for being too intoxicated, but he doesn't seem drunk on CCTV even slightly. So he's last seen heading into this alleyway, and he's never seen again. The official theory is that Dakota crossed Fort Duquesne Boulevard on the other side of the alleyway, and then he heads down the steps towards the river, possibly to urinate. He was a drunk guy leaving a bar and he needed to go to the loo. He thinks the most obvious place to go is the river. But Dakota's mum insists that this isn't really something her son would do. But then Dakota's body is found in the Ohio River near Neville Island 40 days after he disappeared, and the medical examiner is quick to rule Dakota's death an accidental drowning. He's discovered about 10 miles from where he was last seen, and it's thought that to have reached this point where he was found, his body would have had to have travelled through a dam. But despite this, his body was in incredibly good condition. There was not a single scratch mark on Dakota's face or hands when he was found, which is surprising considering the rough waters of the river and the dam his body would have had to have travelled through to get there from the point he was last seen. But later theories suggest that Dakota probably didn't enter the water near where he was last seen at all. It's highly unlikely his body could have travelled so far and through the dam with such little damage. Could Dakota have walked miles further without being seen on any more CCTV? Or did somebody abduct him and dump his body closer to where it was found at the later date? There was very little decomposition, both internally and externally, and did not have the signs of a body that had been in the water for 7 weeks. The family requested the autopsy reports from the district attorney, who complied, and they received it complete with photos. Gannon says that in one of the photos you can clearly see ligature marks on the neck. However, this isn't mentioned in the autopsy report, although it does state there was no internal damage to the neck structure. The family raised their concern over this to the DA's office, and they came back saying that the ligature mark seen in the photo was actually just dried blood from Dakota's mouth and nose that pooled around the neck. Pam, Dakota's mum, argues that any dried blood would have likely washed off in the river where he reportedly was for 40 days. She also argues that her son, the swim team captain, is unlikely to have drowned, even when drunk. A quote from the family at a later press conference says, "Today we are here to say that our son, Dakota, did not get drunk, cross 4 lanes of a highway, a cement barrier, walk down approximately 30 steps to urinate, to then accidentally fall in the river." It was later found that there wasn't enough water in Dakota's lungs to suggest that he had drowned at all, and there were 11 smiley face symbols spray painted on the bridge closest to where Dakota was found, although they can't be entirely sure if the symbols were there previously. According to Gannon, he was also found to have the date rape drug GHB in his system, the same as the rest or a lot of the other potential smiley face victims. And this potentially wasn't the first time that Dakota had been drugged. His friends report that about 6 weeks before his death, he was drugged but managed to make it home safely. The latest update I was able to find on Dakota's case is that the case has been closed and the medical examiner will not change the cause of death, but they have agreed to review additional evidence. From what I can gather, that was around January 2019, and there haven't been any big leaps in the case since then. So here I've told you of 4 cases involved in the smiley face theory, 4 of possibly over 100 at this point. Forgetting the smiley face graffitis completely, here we have 4 men of a similar age, all athletic, popular kind of people, all found dead in bodies of water with little sign they'd been in the water for long. All with potential traces of a date rape drug in their system, acting very intoxicated after drinking very little alcohol. Regardless of whether you believe in the theory or not, there's undeniably some strange connections there. There are also a lot of arguments to go against the theory. The first is that drowning is the 3rd leading cause of unintentional deaths in the US, with males representing 81% of all drowning victims and 90% of drowning victims aged 15 to 24 years old. That's a pretty common way to die. Homicidal drowning, however, is extremely rare. It only accounts for 0.2% of all US murders. It's not easy to murder someone by drowning, there's easier ways to do it. However, in most cases here, Gannon and Duarte aren't arguing that there are homicidal drownings here at all. They seem to think this is more a case of abduction, torture and murder, usually by ligature strangulation it seems, and then the bodies are dumped in the water where they're later found. The Centre for Homicide Research's debunking of the smiley face theory states that everything about these cases are conducive to accidental drowning. They all occurred at night near bars and colleges. All the men had been drinking, and drunk people are more likely to walk downhill because it's easier. Rivers or water sources are typically always downhill. Their impaired coordination makes them susceptible to falling and drowning. They just say that's just the way it is. The centre also point out multiple issues with the smiley faces themselves. As I mentioned earlier in the video, smiley faces are everywhere. They're a very common graffiti and they can be found in all kinds of places. Many of the smiley faces found at locations either where the victim was last seen or where they were found do seem to be very old and worn out, as if they'd been there a long time. And also none of these smiley faces match each other, as if they'd all been drawn by different people. But according to the theory, they likely would have been drawn by different people. According to Gannon, this wouldn't be the work of just one person, but a gang of people who worked together across the USA with the same MO. So it makes sense they wouldn't all look exactly the same. They would all, according to the theory, be different. The entire Homicide Centre document, which I'll link down below with my sources in case you want to read the entire thing, summarises the theory as the product of something called groupthink. The document describes groupthink as groupthink is a condition in which observers are unduly influenced by the apparent authority of other observers, thereby creating a form of peer pressure to conform to their viewpoints. A high decorated and well-seasoned lead homicide investigator from the largest city in the United States acts as the central authority in the Smiley Face killer's case. Emotional investment of an authority figure further perpetuates this misguided theory. This authority figure refers to Gannon. They're basically saying that Gannon is in a place of influence and therefore people are more likely to listen to him. It also goes on to say how society has always felt the need to produce monsters to help explain the unexplainable, to make people feel more at ease. People feel more at ease thinking that this can't just be men getting drunk and ending up in rivers. This has got to be the work of something bigger, something scarier. This kind of absolves the victim of any blame. Families never want to feel like their loved ones were the reason for their own demise. And now this theory is out there, people want to feel like this is the reason for their loved one's death. It makes it easier in a way to have something to fight for here. Although a few of the families of victims on this possible list of victims actually go against the theory, saying it makes it hard for them to move on when it's just always being brought up again and again and again. They just want their loved ones to rest. So what do I personally think? Not a clue. I do think there could be something in the theory, although I think Gannon and Duarte shot themselves in the foot with the inclusion of the smiley faces. The smiley faces just seem to be a reach in my opinion. But the general circumstances of all the deaths, particularly the date rape drugs being found in the systems, does seem to be something to warrant a bit more investigation. The problem is that this happens across so many jurisdictions, it's hard for investigators to look into it without coming across roadblocks. I mean, this could easily be a case of young men just getting too drunk and drowning. But we've got 45 cases here that are eerily similar. I can see why these links have been made. And now the investigators believe there to be more than 100 cases involved in this. A lot of people speculate that the FBI refused to look into this further because there's some more powerful people involved in the murders, and that they could be very aware of this going on, but they don't want to upset these powerful people. Again, this could be the case, just like anything could be possible, but there's no proof for it. For sure though, I don't think Gannon's going to give up on his quest anytime soon. He made a promise to Patrick's mother in 1997 and he intends to see it through. And that's the story of the Smiley Face murder theory. I'd be really intrigued to know what you guys think down below. Do you think there's anything to this? Do you think the smiley faces are relevant to this case, or do you agree with me in that they're probably not all that relevant? I think this case leaves a lot to discuss down below. It's very open-ended, so I can't wait to see what you all think about it. Thank you so much for watching this video. As always, any requests down below would be highly appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.